Hi everyone and welcome back to Primely Positive. My name is YOHIO and I am your host for this show. Today we have a very special guest joining us. I had the privilege to interview the legendary Tom Biley. Yes, that Tom Biley. Tom is the co-founder of Impact Theory, which you can watch here on YouTube. I do it all the time. It's an awesome show. He's also the co-founder of billion-dollar brand Quest Nutrition. Tom was named one of Success Magazine's top 25 influential people of 2018. He was also named Entrepreneur of the Year by Secret Entourage in 2016. But on top of that, he is the nicest guy and he has a lot of wisdom. So please sit down and enjoy this little chat I had the privilege to have with Tom. Enjoy. So help me welcoming Tom Biley to the show. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me, dude. I'm good, man. I'm excited to be here. Bumping into you in Tokyo was a lot of fun. So I'm excited that we connected, and I'm ready to rock.
Thanks for joining us. I'm actually really nervous because I'm usually not on this end interviewing someone else. So it's kind of new.
Do not sweat it. I am the most low-key guy ever. So this will be fun.
Okay, so I wrote down a couple of questions and then I just thought we could like freeform.
Yeah, man, of course.
So let's start with anxiety, since this project is about staying positive in spite of it all. How do you deal with anxiety? Because I know you've been anxious before, like earlier in your life. How is it nowadays?
Well, my anxiety has gotten a lot better. I won't say that it is completely non-existent. It is something that I have to manage at all times, but it was debilitating about, I don't know, maybe a little less than 10 years ago, 8 or 9 years, something like that, to the point where I couldn't tell a story to my wife's family, who I love and know incredibly well, in their living room. So there was like 5 of us, and I almost couldn't speak. It was crazy. And that was when I realized, okay, this has gotten sincerely out of control. And a big part of it, so anxiety is multifaceted. If I were going to, this isn't what I did, unfortunately, because I didn't have these tools, but if I were to help somebody now, the first thing I would have them do is read a book called Feeling Good by David Burns. It's about cognitive behavioral therapy and pattern interrupting. And the trigger for anxiety is very much you're imagining a future in which all hell breaks loose and it's all bad. And so your brain is trying to like deal with that reality. And what I realized was I was rehearsing failure. And so my brain was primed for that failure. So it would go into a circumstance even before anything bad had actually happened. And it was just in fight or flight mode. And as you do that a lot, you now get so worked up that when you're in fight or flight, you're in the sympathetic nervous system. The blood is actually leaving your prefrontal cortex and it's going to where you can fight, flight, or freeze. And you actually have to train yourself to get the blood back into the prefrontal cortex to remain calm. So the way that you do that is stop rehearsing the negative outcome. And that's where cognitive behavioral therapy comes in, learning to recognize the distortions in your own thinking, that you're catastrophizing things, you're overgeneralizing, like this is definitely going to be bad. And, this could end my career and things like that, which is all false, by the way, but your brain gets in that loop. So stop rehearsing the failure and then learning for me to do diaphragmatic breathing, which at a physiological level is moving you out of the sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight response, and into the parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest and digest. And that's actually how you get the blood back into the prefrontal cortex. So you have your higher level cognition again, you're not freezing up, you're able to, navigate that situation. And meditation was a huge part of it for me. And then the other part, which in the beginning I just would not have believed, is entirely to do with your diet. And so the role that the gut plays in managing your anxiety is really pretty incredible. So moving almost exclusively to a whole food diet. Your body is an incredibly complex system of feedback going from the brain to the body, but also the body to the brain. So you have this thing called the vagus nerve, which is the biggest nerve in the body. And 80% of the signals that transmit over the vagus nerve are from the body to the brain. So the body is constantly telling the brain what is going on. So if you've been rehearsing failure, so you're imagining these horrible scenarios, you don't know how to diaphragmatic breathe, so you don't have the physiological way to get out of that fight or flight mode, and your gut is in a constant state of what they call dysbiosis. So it's like sending these sort of panic signals of, yo, I don't know what the we're eating, but it is all bad. This is a real problem. You put all of that together into this crazy cocktail, and you just find it so easy to slide off into madness. Now, if you get the body right, but your head is still messed up, you're still going to have a problem, but it becomes so much easier to manage. So for me, unfortunately, because I love it so much, a big part of getting this under control was no longer drinking Monster energy drinks. So because there's so much artificial sweetener in that.
Yeah,
And I was drinking 3 full-sized Monsters a day, plus a couple cans of Diet Coke. And by beginning to reduce that, so I'll have 1/2 can a week, and that's sort of my glorious little treat on a Saturday. And I find that I actually can feel, even after that 1 can, I can feel like a little bit of a sense of butterflies in my stomach. But the other effects that I get are so wonderful that I do have 1/2 can a week, but in that I'm able to get a grip. So that's sort of the quick nutshell of how to deal with anxiety. But read that book by David Burns. It really is incredible.
So when you get that feeling like you're gonna feel anxiety soon, like it's coming, you know, how do you do to immediately, do you do the breathing first, or do you sit down and meditate, or like what do you start with if you feel like
my first thing is always breathing. So I always start with breathing. I get the diaphragmatic breathing going, but I'll also do some more intense breath work. So one of the more interesting things is this guy named James Nestor, who I recently interviewed on Impact Theory. And he's got this whole notion that part of what's happening with when you're suffering from anxiety, when your breathing isn't in the right cadence, is that what you're dealing with is an inability to tolerate CO2. So people think of CO2 just as a byproduct of breathing, but you actually need both oxygen and CO2. You can kill an animal with pure oxygen, you can kill an animal with pure CO2. So it really is this balance. But he said that if you want to induce panic in somebody, all like actual freak out panic, all you have to do is give them a single breath of pure CO2 and they will go into like this crazy panic attack. So training the body to deal with CO2 can be really powerful. So if I am going into something that's really stressful, I'll do really rapid breathing, really deep, forceful, like Wim Hof style. I don't know if you know Wim Hof or not, but really forceful Wim Hof style breathing. And I do that a lot. So I do that every day. And part of that is just training my body to deal with the CO2. So I'll practice, it's not breath holding, but I will try to make, and I count my 5 breaths. So I get out a stopwatch and I time myself. How long can I go on 5 breaths? And I can easily do 2.5 minutes. Sometimes I can push it closer to 3. And when you start trying to do that and you realize like that's, I don't know what, 35, 40 seconds between breaths. So it's not insignificant. But there's something about it that, it feels good, which is bizarre. You wouldn't think that limiting your breath, and this goes back to James Nestor, who talks that a lot of what people are struggling from is they actually breathe too much. And if you look at somebody who's in a panic state, they're breathing really shallow and really fast. And one of the ways you begin to calm yourself down is not only in that moment, breathing deeply and from your diaphragm and through the nose, by the way, which Wim Hof says doesn't matter. James Nestor makes a very compelling case that it matters, and it matters a lot. So very deep breaths through your nose, but not just at that moment where you can feel it coming on, but training yourself daily to get good at handling CO2, to be able to move past that moment of panic, to actually be able to find calm in a limited breath environment. So that's my sort of go-to thing. And then if I'm really escalating, then I'll sit down and meditate. And that is a silver bullet that works every time. I just don't always have the time to get like to the ideal state. So a lot of times it's just about getting back to a manageable state where I have no affectations of anxiety, right? So I can feel that I'm a little anxious, but there's nothing in my demeanor that would give anybody the inclination that I'm in that space. So I can usually get there with just a few diaphragm breaths. But if I really want to get to zero anxiety, then I have to sit and meditate.
That's interesting, because I also read quite recently. I don't remember the book, but that breathing through your nose is good. So I started doing that and really thinking about it, always breathing through my nose. And I would also say that it's actually helped a lot. Like you feel calmer during the day, like whatever happens. So there's something to that, I think. And I'm also big on meditation, so I meditate every day, at least once a day, and I've been doing that for years. So I really get you on that point. Like meditation saved my life, really. So yeah, that's a
Agreed.
huge thing. I didn't know about that CO2 stuff though, so that's interesting, actually.
Yeah, and look, I am a neophyte to it. I highly recommend that people check out James Nestor. He wrote a whole book on it called Breath, but you can find him on podcasts and stuff. And he's got an extraordinary amount of very compelling information. I've never heard anybody, and I've read a lot of people talking about breath and breathing. I've never heard anybody make as compelling a case as he does in Breath.
That's cool. So I usually, when I need to get pumped up, and this is not to kiss your ass, but I really love your motivational content that you put out on YouTube. So I usually put one of those videos on, the longer ones, and it really gives me strength when I watch those. But my question is, when motivation isn't, when it just isn't, like when it doesn't cut it, when it's not enough to just watch something motivational or trying to motivate yourself to get out of bed and do something worthwhile, what can you do when you're in that state when nothing seems to like improve your mindset?
So this is now we're getting into the hard work of being an optimized human. So this is a very complicated problem, and I'll break it into a few different pieces. So number one really is not momentary motivation, but real hunger and desire for success. And watching you is really fucking fascinating. Like seeing the persona that you've created and just the amount of training that would go into getting as good as you are at the guitar or singing is fucking incredible. And then being able to perform on stage, right? That's just somebody who wants it. Now, I don't know why you want it that badly, but one of the most true things ever said about getting out of bed and getting to work is when you want success, like a drowning man wants his next breath of air, you will find a way. And if you take that as metaphor, you may never understand the power of that statement. If you take it literally, then you'll actually get it. Like imagine, hold your breath, try to make it to a minute. If you've never held your breath before, you're going to start panicking around 20 seconds. The thought of getting to a minute is like impossible. Every urge you have in your body is just compelling you to do something. If you can, which I think everybody can, if you can build that level of desire for success, then you will try anything and everything. You will run into 1,000 obstacles, but you won't lose your enthusiasm. And there's an amazing Winston Churchill quote, one of my favorite all times. And he said, success is the ability to go from failure to failure to failure without a loss of enthusiasm. Now, what's interesting is I often refer to that level of desire as a sickness, because I'm not even saying it's healthy. I'm just saying it's effective. So if you want to do something extraordinary with your life, leaning way the into like, I want this thing, I have to have this thing. And the way that you create that desire, and I want people to understand, desire is a process. So you don't have to be born with it. Like this is just understanding the way the human mind works and how it will shape to whatever paces you put it through. Just like if you rehearse failure, then you're going to constantly be panicking. If you practice desire over time, you realize, whoa, like I'm actually escalating in how badly I want this thing. And the way that you practice it is by saying it to yourself. I want this thing. It matters to me. This is why it matters to me. Associate it with people you know and love. And that if I could pull this off, I could do this, that, or the other, just obsessively focus on those moments when you were on stage and it went right, or when you wrote that song and like, I want to recapture that feeling, or somebody comes up to you and says, your music changed my life. And like, you think about that person, you lean into it and you tell yourself that story. And then doing things like what I'm doing now, telling other people what I'm about, but in an embodied way, right? Where you can feel me getting amped up right now. And I'm doing that on purpose because I know that by embodying my excitement, even if like I'm by nature introverted, but I know the power of embodying something, feeling it, getting out there, speaking louder, moving my arms, like all this shit works. And it tells your brain, they've studied this, and your brain is going to justify whatever amplitude of reaction you give something. So if you help somebody. And then you're like, that was the most important thing I've ever done. This is fucking huge. And you're swinging your arms and you're telling somebody about the story. And this is fucking crazy. I can't believe it. Like, this is nuts. Your brain goes, shit, that must really be important because we're freaking out here. And you leverage that two-way street, right? Of the body communicating to the brain even more than the brain is communicating to the body. So now I'm just giving myself that impulse when I talk about this thing that I want to desire in the future. As I tell somebody else, or I tell myself, I need to do it in this big way so that I'm embodying the enthusiasm that I actually want to feel. Now, if you do that enough, what started out as somewhat faked starts to become really real. And all of a sudden you have this huge emotional reaction because you've been rehearsing a big emotional reaction. Now, you need to beware not to put your sense of self-worth into accomplishing it, right? I'm trying to build the next Disney. Now, let's say that I fail. I'm okay with that because what I have chosen to value myself for is the sincere pursuit. So as long as I'm going all out every day to gain the skill set that I need to actually build the next Disney, I'm not just saying it, that I'm really pursuing it. If I end up not doing it, that doesn't matter to me because I have just been very careful to say, I love the chase. And for the chase, I have to have a very clear goal. I need to be excited about it. I need to believe it could be real. And I need to believe that if it were real, it would be awesome. But even more importantly, I need to love what I do every day in pursuit of that, because I can't guarantee that I'll be successful, but I can guarantee that I'm going to struggle. And if I can love that struggle, we've all heard, love the journey, don't worry about the destination. So it's this weird friction between you actually need to be pursuing that destination, like hardcore, and that needs to matter to you and you need to be excited about it, but you can't value yourself for achieving it. And part of the reason that valuing yourself for achievement is so dangerous is, again, you can't guarantee that it will happen, but also from an evolutionary standpoint, the way that nature works is it incentivizes with pleasure the things that you need to do to stay alive. So eating, for instance, is the perfect, and I think this is the reason that we call it's a hunger for success is because you're actually leveraging the evolutionary mechanisms that drive you to go hunt and all that make hunger this all-consuming but also exciting thing as you think about the meal that you're going to have. It's leveraging that. Now, what do we know about hunger? 2 hours after you eat, you're hungry again. So no matter how grand the amount of accomplishment you have is, you will always want more, in the way that you can never eat one meal that's big enough that you never need to eat again. It's impossible. The same is true of success. There is no amount of success that you will get where you'll say, oh, I don't need any more success, because you still have that hunger. So you have to be very careful not to invest any sort of emotional thing into having, but to really love that chase.
Yeah, that is really powerful stuff. And I really recognize myself in that because I was fortunate to know what I wanted to do when I was about 12, 13 years old, and that's what I'm doing right now. So I've kind of always known what I wanted to do. But, and of course I had goals from the start, but they were really lofty goals. And I had a clear picture, of course, in my mind. I'm a big visualizer and everything. Even though I didn't know about the techniques at the time, when I look back, I see that I actually used a lot of the stuff that I've been reading about, not thinking about it. And a lot of those things happened, of course, because I never stopped working. I quit school when I was 14, 15, and I've been working since. So yeah, like I really love that feeling when you come home and you've been working for like 15 hours and you're so tired, your brain is like, you don't even know where you are, and you're just physically and mentally tired. But that is the best feeling ever for me. Like really knowing that you've been doing your best all day and you do it for the sake of just doing it because you love it, and you have the destination somewhere in your subconscious, but you don't think about it all the time, right? You just need to put down the work. And but then a follow-up question would be, I mean, my audience watching, they're mostly like 18 to 25 years old and younger than that too. And a lot of people in that age don't know what to do with their lives yet. So how would you say that you should go about finding what you want to do? Because that's a huge thing for
The
young
important,
people.
no question, and it's probably the question that I get asked the most. What people have to understand is that you don't find your passion. You don't find your life's mission or anything like that. You create it, you decide. And I hope that that lets people off the hook from feeling like, oh man, I'm not one of those lucky people that knew what I wanted to do from the time I was a little kid. Most people aren't. Most people fall into the camp of like, living their life by the law of accident has not led them anywhere interesting. So they find themselves at some point, 18, 25, 55, whatever, going, whoa, I'm now awake and aware that I want something very specific to aim myself at. But when I turn inward, I don't see anything obvious that I should aim myself at. And then they start beating themselves up. They think something is wrong with them, that, they don't have this burning desire or passion. And that just isn't how passion works. Passion, like desire, is a process. So what you do is you break this notion that passion is an archaeological dig where you're going to turn in and find some glowing ember that's been hiding inside of you your entire life, and realize that instead of an archaeological dig, it's an architectural build. You're going to create something. So what do you start with? The foundation is going to be something that you find interesting. And it is not going to be self-evident. You're not going to turn inward and be like, oh my God, yes, like this is that thing. You're going to turn inward and be like, well, I kind of like this and I kind of like that. And this is cool and that's fun. And you're going to pick one of them and you're going to go down the process of engagement. You're going to engage deeply. So let's say that people, they want to be a musician and they've always kind of liked it, but they've never thought like, I'm not going to do like what you've done and move to Japan and, learn to play guitar and all that crazy shit. But now they're going to do that. And you're going to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to learn to play guitar or piano or sing or whatever their thing is. And they're going to find it's hard. And they're going to find that it forces them to confront their insecurities because they're not going to be good at it. And so then they're going to have this moment of hopelessness where it's like, oh my God, this is so big and I'll never be as good as he is. And in that moment, if you're like, even though I'm afraid all of that's true, this is fun, man. And like even getting the little bit better that I got, like I want to keep doing this. And that to me is the simple barometer by which people should judge. Does it give you more energy than it takes? And if it gives you more energy than it takes, then keep doing it. If it doesn't, move on to something else. Now, if you do a bunch of things and you find yourself quitting at everything, you may just have a lack of resiliency and you need to develop that muscle first. And you need only read the book Grit by Angela Duckworth and you will be well on your way. So don't let that be some deep mystery. Even grit is a process. But for now, just to keep this clean, I will say that they have the grit. So they're not falling out for that reason. So you engage with this thing. You're like, this is hard, but I'm willing to keep doing it because actually engaging with it gives me more energy than it takes. The more I do it, the more I want to do it. Now you're on the path to a fascination. And the difference between a fascination and a passion is that you get in this reciprocal love affair with the thing that you're doing. So I'll explain it through music. When you first start out playing music, it's just about you. Anybody walking by hearing you practice probably wishes you would stop because you suck and it's not interesting to hear. But then you get to the point where you've worked really hard for this thing and then you leave people's jaws on the floor. Like even yesterday I was going and listening to a bunch of your music and reading your YouTube comments and hearing how people flip out about the way your voice sounds or how well you play guitar. It's like, that is the juice, right? That's the love affair. That's the like, I worked my ass off to be able to play like this, to be able to sing like this, to be able to write songs or find songs. And now it's actually impacting other people. And as a social creature, we live for that shit. And so now you've got a love affair. You've created a set of skills that are unique to you, that you worked really hard for, and they allow you to impact other people in a way. So it's not just serving you, it's serving other people. And when you're in that kind of feedback loop, it makes you want to work even harder. That's a passion. I got good at this, but it doesn't just allow me to serve me. It allows me to influence and impact other people in a way that's deeply pleasurable. And so now it's reciprocal. And that's all you're looking for, is something that you like enough to fight through the boredom of getting good and developing that skill set. And then you finally get to that point where it's reciprocal. You're able to do something, create something that gets you that reflection back from other people that this is valuable, this is worthy, and they appreciate it. And once you're there, baby, it is a nonstop passion.
Yeah, I feel you on that one. When I started playing guitar, I was 11 years old, I think. And I mean, I sucked at first, of course, because everybody sucks at first. And but my guitar is my father is a guitarist, so he taught me actually from the start. And since he knows how to practice, how to get good. He knows the steps because he's done it himself. It was really easy for me to get this, blueprint of how you do it. So I was really lucky there too. But I still had to put in the hours because, I mean, I got home from school and then I would just sit with my guitar for 8 hours straight. And then we, went to eat and I took my guitar with me to the table. And then I, one spoon, one guitar lick, one spoon. So it was always.
You gave me the chills, dude. That's incredible.
Even while we were like watching a movie or something, I was just improvising to the same key as the soundtrack, and, just always having the guitar in my hand because it gets familiar and then you can just do whatever because you don't even have to watch your hand anymore because you know where everything is and you can just slip into a key really fast because you hear, oh, it's that key. Okay, great. I can just do a solo over that. But it takes hours upon hours, like 8-9 hours a day, at least, I would say, and years of it because otherwise you won't get any good. You can get to a normal chord level, in a few months, but still you have to put in the hours. And if you want to get really excellent at something, then you can't just quit after you're like, okay, well now I'm quite all right. Yeah, sure. But a lot of people are quite all right. But if you want to be on the top, then you have to just keep on pushing through. And when you get to that plateau, when you think you're getting good, that plateau is like the longest and hardest part to get from the top, say 20% to the top 10% in an industry. Like that's the long game. And that takes even more years to do. And a lot of people give up when they come to that plateau because they don't know how to continue. And that certainly happened for me as well. Even with Japanese as a language, that happened. I was like, what am I going to do? Like, how am I going to get better? But then you find your ways and then you just keep pushing through and you'll find what works for you. So yeah, once
Are you fluent in Japanese now?
Yeah. So
that's incredible, man. That language sounds brutally difficult to learn. I'm very impressed.
It is actually. I saw some statistics. It's like the hardest language to learn in the world for an English speaker, and Swedish is very similar to English, grammar-wise and words and everything. So, yeah, in the beginning you have to it's like Yoda speech. It's like I school to go. It's that kind of always the verb last in the sentence and everything. So you have to rewire your brain completely in order to get that first. But then once you understand it, then it just flows naturally, but it takes time. So yeah, on that topic, how was Japan? Because I got to chat with you. That's a really great story, actually. Most people don't know, but I was walking down Shibuya in rural Tokyo, and I was there with my dad. We were going to a bar, and all of a sudden I just see Tom and his wife just on the crossing, like the famous crossing. And at first I didn't believe my eyes. I was like, no, that's not Tom. Like, why is he in Tokyo? And what's the odds? And but then I saw him recording some story for Instagram or something. So I waited until he finished his story and I was like, Tom. And it was Tom. So then we had a chat for 10 minutes. It was really nice. I was kind of starstruck, to be honest. And I met a lot of famous people. So, I mean, I watch you all the time and I've done it for years. So just having you on like this is really an honor. I just wanted you to know that. It's really fun.
Thank you, man. It's really kind. I'm a total freak for Japan. So it was a sort of long and unexpected road to that. So in trying to build the next Disney, I started in traditional Western comics here and became very frustrated because my background, as you said in the intro, I started in filmmaking, but I ended up going on this really long entrepreneurial journey and built a nutrition company. And so I'm dealing with grocery stores and I understand distribution at a global scale. And so when I got into the comic industry and I was like, this is so fucking antiquated and broken. And what are these people doing? And it just seems so absurd. And the industry was declining. And just as I looked at, okay, I always play this game from a business perspective of no bullshit. What would it take to, fix this, do this bigger, whatever. And I'm looking at the industry and I'm just like, wow, first I need to figure out who's doing this right. Is anybody doing this well? And if you're talking about comics and somebody doing it well, you're going to end up looking at Japan. So now I find myself looking at manga. I'd never been into manga. I'd never seen any anime. And so I start reading manga and I'm like, this is actually really good. And they've done this amazing job of keeping kids in the ecosystem. Whereas in the US, about almost 30 years ago now, they abandoned getting kids into the market. And that was like the first thing I was like, this is self-evidently a problem. Like, you need to be getting new people into the system. And so I read this book called A Billion Wicked Thoughts, and it talks about this thing called the age of imprinting, which is like 11 to 14. And needless to say, shonen, the few years as it translates, is exactly that time period. And there's a reason that the Japanese have stayed focused, not exclusively, but like that's their bread and butter, is because that's when you get people into the marketplace, and so it thrives. So Japan just continues to thrive. And the more I look at their industry, it's also declining just because everybody's moving to digital. But it's like 6 times the size of the US market. So I was like, this is nuts. And then if you factor in the pirate sites, it's God only knows how many times bigger than the Western market. So I was like, all right, I got to go check this out. I need to go see Japan for myself. And Tokyo had been on my bucket list because I'm a cyberpunk freak. The aesthetic of cyberpunk, big, towering metropolises, just capture my imagination. So there are people that like to be out in nature. There are people that like to be in the city. I like to be in the city. So I was like, I need to go now for business as well as it being my bucket list. I went. It was more extraordinary than I could have imagined, just absolutely breathtaking. And there, as a culture, from a legislative standpoint, I won't say that the people are like this. You tell me, I haven't been there enough. But from a legislative standpoint, they're extraordinarily xenophobic. So when you're there, it is just like a sea of Japanese. You don't see like... In fact, picking me out would be so easy because I'm a tall white kid. So it's like walking through Shibuya Crossing. The fact that you could even notice me is because there is like a real hardcore culture. Like they're not ashamed of like, this is Japan. Like, we are Japanese. We are into Japanese shit. And it's like, so it's so neat to go experience something so different. And then the more I immerse myself in manga and anime, the more I'm just absolutely blown away by how unique their storytelling style is, their culture is. So I ended up going to Japan another time, not long after you and I met on a pure business trip, and just meeting the people in the industry and seeing how they've been successful, and seeing now how Korea is really starting to kick in with webtoons, and how that I think is going to become the dominant form. But there's something about Japanese culture and Tokyo specifically that just captures my imagination in a way I can't explain. I've never been anywhere that I thought, oh, I could live here, until I went to Tokyo. And then I was like, man, I don't know that I'd want to be there year round, but I could clock a good 5 months every year in Tokyo. It's that extraordinary.
Yeah, if you need somewhere to live, just hit me up next time you're there. But like,
thank you, man. Yeah, hopefully that'll be soon.
Yeah, I hope we're able to travel again soon, because I need to get back to work.
I imagine they do not expect you to be able to speak Japanese.
Not all the time, no. But I think the cyberpunk stuff is really coming back to Japanese anime as well now. Like, that kind of aesthetic is really popular even in Japan at the moment. So I think there's going to be a lot of cool stuff coming out soon. And they are also all into mecha and sci-fi, and there's so much cool stuff in anime. I don't watch that much anime anymore. I did when I was a kid. People assume that I'm like only watching anime all day long because I do what I do, but I'm not up to date at all. Like, I don't know what the kids are talking about. I'm like, no, I haven't seen it. Sorry. So I'm kind of an old school guy, but.
Yeah, I would say with your persona, I'm actually surprised that you don't watch anime. So I can see people being like, wait a second, what do you mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny, but I grew up watching it, so fine. Of course, it's inspired me in many ways, and I still like it. It's just that, I don't watch a lot of series and stuff either. I just work. So if I'm doing something recreational, it's reading mostly. I don't watch a lot of stuff. I have one question, I think. Yeah, since during this pandemic, or whatever you want to call it right now, it's whatever you think about different countries' strategies on how to deal with this thing. And whatever your political views are, people are still lonely right now, right? All over the world. And that's a big issue, especially for older people. That's a big issue, but also for younger people like us that can't really hang out as much as we would like to. And even if like I'm not that scared of this thing personally, but there's a lot of people that are scared, so I need to respect that, and that means we can't really meet that much. And what would you say you can do with loneliness? I know it's a really big question, right? But at the moment, how can you deal with loneliness?
So I would highly encourage people to do things like Zoom connections. So I never did Zoom calls in my personal life until the pandemic hit. And now with both sides of my family, I do weekly calls. Seeing people, even if it's, over a camera, actually makes a huge difference. So if you have people in your life that you can do that, I know it's, always slightly inconvenient and there are other things you could see doing with your time, but it really does stack up that loneliness. And so taking the time every week to make space, to connect with people, to talk to people. And, I'm very fortunate that between doing podcasts and things, I'm constantly engaging with people. But I do, even though I have that, I go out of my way to put more of that in with the people that I love and care about and otherwise would have seen in person, but now can't. I think that's really important. If you don't have people like that in your life, even reading a book, which feels far more intimate than watching a show, can make you feel like you're being understood, which is a large part of why we read. It's also a large part of why we want to talk to people, is to feel seen and understood. And when a book is good, it makes you feel like you're not alone in having had those emotions or those desires or, whatever the case may be. So I think that can be really profound for people that are struggling just from an insane amount of isolation. But finding other human beings that you can connect with, volunteering your time. If you can connect with something where there's a component of over the internet, finding a way to, even if you're not getting paid for it, just finding a way to help somebody somewhere with something, so that you have that human interaction. So, because I know there are people out there that don't have anybody in their life that they can reach out to, and finding organizations that you can volunteer for over Zoom or Skype can be incredibly powerful. So yeah, I would highly, highly encourage people to find a way, even if it's over camera, to be connecting with people.
Do you think, talking about reading, since people are lonely and they're scared and we don't know when this is over, we don't know how it's going to be after this is over or if it's going to be over, there's so many questions that people have. Do you think reading comics, like superhero comics specifically, is something that could inspire? Because the hero is always winning and they're fighting evil, and it's very, the symbols are really strong in comics overall. Do you think that's a good thing to be doing now during this time, to maybe, if you don't read comics at the moment, to just get back to that, to get some inspiration and courage from the stories?
I don't think that it's any sort of universal solution. I love them, and so it's always fun to find people that respond positively. So if it's your thing, if you have any inclination, a great story goes a long way, whether it's a book or a comic book. But I wouldn't call that like a panacea. I wish, just because it's something I'm so into, but alas, I think there are a lot of people that just don't really respond to that and trying to sort of force themselves. It's more about what is that thing that you respond to? Is it just a Zoom call with your friends? Is it a magazine, a gossip magazine, whatever makes you feel connected? That's the thing that people should pursue. For me, fiction always made me feel understood. So reading a comic book or reading just a normal book, made me feel like I was a part of that world, like I knew those characters and that they were feeling things that I felt, and therefore I didn't feel alone and I didn't feel isolated. And I mean, look, that can be a salve for people, even just growing up as a kid. You always, not always, but so many, maybe it is universal actually, just feel like nobody gets what I'm going through. And then you pick up a book and you're like, Jesus, this character feels like exactly me. They're going through the same thing that I went through. And it could be a fantasy book. They could be an orc. It could be set in the future, you know, whatever. But you feel like that person would understand you if you were with them. And there is a real intimacy to read stories, even if they're a comic book. Just there's something about reading that impacts you in a way. And look, I'm actually a bigger fan of movies and TV. They've had a bigger impact on my life. But for that sense of not feeling alone, there's just nothing quite like reading.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a bookworm myself, so I always go to reading when I feel lonely or depressed or whatever it may be. If I feel down, I always pick up a book. And actually, talking about a story that's always been, I mean, it's an old story, but Lord of the Rings, I mean, everybody knows what it is. But that story really helped me as a kid. Like, I watched the movie before I read the books because I was only like 6 or 7 years old when the movies came out. But and I didn't really figure it out until later on why I liked that story so much. I mean, I like fantasy, I like the aesthetics, I like the setting and everything, but it was a story that grabbed me and the characters. And I mean, I was bullied. I was the small kid. I was skinny. I was the emo kid. You know, I was the smallest guy in class, and, you know, people teased me and bullied me and stuff like that. And watching those movies, I mean, it's about a hobbit, like literally a very small guy, uh, who is afraid, but he does it anyways. Like, he takes on that burden to save the world by himself in the end. Because no one else could do it, and he's the smallest person. That's very symbolical, and like, the smallest man can do the greatest things. It's like that kind of metaphor, and I didn't realize that it was that inspired me until I was like 18, 19. I was like, wait, that's why. Now I get it. And I watched those movies so many times. I read the books. I love the universe and everything, but just that little thing about a small man being able to do great things, I think was really inspiring for me when I was a child. So yeah, stories can really help. Like, whatever, if it's a comic book or a book or a TV show, it doesn't really matter. But just a story in itself is really powerful. So I agree on that, really.
Yeah, and there is no substitute. There's a reason that every culture that has ever existed tells stories. They just have a way of really getting inside of us. It's a big deal.
True. So to begin to round things off, what are your next projects? What are you planning right now? Of course, things you can share with us.
So there's two sides of the business. There is what I call direct to camera stuff. So we've got Impact Theory University, where I teach a class on mindset and I teach a class on building businesses. So that's going constantly and is a really important part of what I do. And then there's the other side, which is the fiction side. We've got a bunch of projects that we're developing. Webtoon right now, we have Neon Future is out. It's cyberpunk, of course. And that's something we did. I don't know if you know the DJ Steve Aoki,
Yeah.
but we did with Steve Aoki. And that's doing really well. We're on Webtoon Canvas there. So super excited about that. And we launch new episodes every Monday. And then we have a couple more projects for Webtoon that are behind that we're creating right now. So super excited about those. And then we're also doing some reality shows that we're going to be shopping around here in the US. So I'm excited about where those are in development. And those are the two sides of my life, and the things that take up the vast majority of my time. Yeah, I'm excited for people to check it out.
Cool, man. So in the spirit of impact theory, where can people find you online?
So at Tom Bilyeu is the social handles, YouTube /Tom Bilyeu, and then impacttheoryuniversity.com. And those are the best places.
So last question then. What kind of impact do you want to have on the world?
Nice. I see what you did there. I want to make sure that nobody gets to the age of 15 without encountering a growth mindset. So when I think about what problems we face it really isn't a hardware problem. It isn't that people aren't smart enough to do incredible things. It's that they're not running the right operating system. So the way that they think of themselves, the way that they think of the world is flawed to the point of having them pursue actions that don't uplift themselves or humanity. And so if I can get people to recognize that everybody has the ability to get better at whatever it is that they want to get better at, then I think the world becomes an interesting place. It's what I call the only belief that matters. If you believe that time and energy put into getting better actually results with you getting better, then people will point themselves at something that they care about, get great at that thing, and then be able to make a contribution. And that is how you develop fulfillment, which is ultimately sort of the end brain state that everybody should be chasing, which is different than momentary happiness. It's far more resilient and profound. But if we had a world full of people who were pursuing real fulfillment, which has an innate quality of doing things that serve not only you, but other people, I think the world gets interesting and certainly reduces human suffering. So that is the impact.
That's a really great answer, as always. Thank you so much, Tom, for doing this. I really appreciate you doing this for me and for everybody watching. And I think this will be very, very helpful for a lot of people struggling right now. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Love you, man. And I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, dude. Awesome. Sounds good. Thanks for having me on.